Hi there, welcome to Russia Unfiltered. Today we're going to be talking about a very taboo topic. Is it okay to like Russia? Now with the war in its fourth year, arguments about the promotion of Russian culture, its participation in the West, Russian studies courses at universities, and even doing business in Russia continue to rage. Russian cultural figures, theatre troupes, sports teams, all returning to Western audiences now, as well as some foreign companies, including giants like Samsung, are exploring a return to the Russian market. On top of that, the number of Western foreigners are also coming back to Russia to visit as tourists, and some are even relocating to Russia. At the same time, EU is tightening visa restrictions on Russian citizens. There is increasing sanctions pressure. Anyone seen as promoting Russian culture or calling for a dialogue in the conflict is called out. So all of this has made us wonder, is it okay to like Russia? Can we still appreciate its rich cultural and scientific legacy without feeling guilt? Should experts and the media show a bit more responsibility in how they portray Russia outside of the war's context? And on top of that, can ties be mended in certain spheres? And as three Russia residents, we want to also consider, living in Russia and liking it. Is that different? Is that okay? And why is that okay? So I'm James Pearce.
I'm Jeremy Morris.
And I'm Jonny Tickle.
All right, chaps, let's get started. So, Anna Netrebko recently came to London on September 11th, the soprano singer. My hometown of Peterborough, we've got Swan Lake coming up in a couple of weeks, which is oddly enough a Moldovan theatre troupe. But there's a market for Russian culture in the West still, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been. I mean, I think this is also a reflection of why it's three British guys here sitting here. There's always been this massive affinity in the UK, going back more than 100 years, right, for Russian culture. And yeah, part of that is a sense of exoticism, perhaps overdone, but also because, Russia has made this consistent contribution to European high culture, right? Unlike the example that you're talking about, James, right? Music, opera, classical music in particular, but also, again, sustained, right? Because it's not just the 19th century, it's the 20th century too. Shostakovich, one of his biggest, and Prokofiev, one of their biggest, they would be standards, wouldn't they? In something like Last Night of the Proms in London. But, obviously I also started my career teaching Russian literature, and that is primarily why people were studying Russian, if we're going to generalize historically.
Well, even the school curriculum, I remember Russian history was a big part of it, actually. I don't know if that was true because we're all different ages, we should probably tell our viewers. So when I was at school in the sort of mid-2000s, it was part of the curriculum.
Okay.
It wasn't in my school, apart from the fact that when they were involved in World War One or World War Two, that was the only time that Russia, the Soviet Union, ever came up.
Yeah. But that, as Jeremy was saying, doesn't that kind of explain, well, because it has been very much intertwined with our own sort of cultural legacy and history, it's more natural for us to gravitate. Go on, Jeremy, I can see you.
No. I was going to say, Jonny, what about your perspective on this? Because you studied Russian, right?
Yeah, I studied Russian in university, and I wasn't coming at it from a cultural point of view. I was never into ballet or opera. I still am not. I enjoy Russian literature. Yeah, yeah. I enjoy Russian literature, but that's not why I got into Russia. My actual way into Russia was through history. Being interested in history. But I think nowadays when people think about Russia and Russian culture, the way people talk about Russia is very unusual compared to how they talk about the cultures of other countries. Normally, we don't treat liking a country's culture as a moral stance on its politics. And no one expects someone who loves American jazz or British literature to answer for Iraq or Afghanistan, or French art isn't blamed for Algeria, or Belgian comics aren't cancelled because of the Congo. Yet with Russia, this separation breaks down. So I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this, because the standard for Russia seems to be that enjoying Russian culture can look to those like affected less like neutral taste and more like siding with Russia. So I'm interested in what you two have to say about this.
Do you want to jump in first, Jeremy?
Yeah, obviously I spend a lot of time talking to people here in Denmark, where I work, but also in the UK. And I think even right at the beginning of the war, right, in 2022, a lot of ordinary people, yeah, outside kind of cultural sphere or outside academia, outside the media, they were like, well, what's going on here? So I think right at the beginning, there was this tension between kind of an activist, moralizing approach, which we're talking about, right? I think it was Tchaikovsky, indeed, that was like pulled from some performance. And then that was like in the news. And then I think it was a knee-jerk reaction, and it really didn't have a lot of support in the public. And in fact, it became counterproductive as time has gone on. And now, yeah, it looks almost absurd when somebody is taking a position that, oh, this is something to do with Russia, therefore it shouldn't happen.
Well, this happened in academia, didn't it? There was a lot of attempts to decolonize Russian studies curriculums, Eastern European studies curriculums. Some of it was purity tests. It was we must take a moral stance. But some of it, I think, was coming from a good place. I mean, yes, the Baltic is important in the Eastern European story, as is Poland, as are plenty of other countries. But in making that purity test, you kind of take away again from the kind of real significance Russia had. I mean, you cannot understand these countries without understanding Russian history and the cultural influence it still has. I was checking today, actually, and me and my friend Anastasia Mahon, we published a few years ago on what did we miss in the conflict. Russian is still the second most popular language on the internet.
Really?
Yeah. That's the UN as well that measured that. That's not me saying that. That's the UN. We can trust them, I think, still. But again, Central Asian studies courses haven't really had the same pull or focusing on the Caucasus. And again, I think part of that is, as Jeremy was saying, when you say, I did Russian studies, I studied Russian, it still has, on the, oh, okay, that's interesting. There is a natural kind of interest there. And, there's something more... There's still something more impressive about it, no?
Well, I think I have 2 points on this, really. The first one is, you could argue that Western universities sort of treat Russian studies as frozen in the past, maybe in 2010 or something. So that's language, culture, and Putinology, basically, Kremlinology, without grappling with colonial history, or whether that's Ukraine's viewpoint or the viewpoint of any other country. And I think that bringing post-imperial sort of awareness into Russian studies could make the field healthier. It's not just a defensive thing. And I think my second point on this is that there's an important difference between personal and institutional. Between what individuals do and what institutions do. So it's a legitimate view. It may or may not be my view, to say that it's fine to keep reading Russian novels, watch Russian films, visit the country. Personal curiosity is not the same as political endorsement, but institutions have power, reach, and their choices signal legitimacy. So a major theatre inviting a state-funded Russian troupe, or university taking money from a Kremlin-linked organisation or something, isn't neutral. That can be used for propaganda, and maybe that's why blanket cultural boycotts feel too broad, whereas uncritical engagement feels naive.
Well, yeah, if I may just jump in before Jeremy comes back in here. For instance, I went to the Posner Urgant Travels show last year in London at the Troxy Theatre at Limehouse. When they were in Amsterdam, when they started that tour, there were protesters. These guys are Kremlin propagandists. I mean, they're not, number one, especially not Urgant. But also, do they always have to be talking about the war? Can't they just perform? Does it matter when they perform? And certainly when we were there, I went with my wife, obviously, who's Russian. It wasn't just Russian citizens, it was Ukrainians were there were Moldovans, Latvians. They were there to enjoy the evening. I think that's okay, right? Jeremy, go on.
Well, I mean, if we're still sticking with, if we're talking about, I can obviously talk endlessly about academia and the challenges there. But if we're still talking about, is it okay to like Russian culture, then I think the point that I wanted to make was that the longer the war goes on, the more people I think are able to be much more, much less kind of moralistic, right? And see that, I think what we all agree that you can so again on the literature thing, right, you can say, and many Ukrainians have said, there's elements of Russian high culture that we love in the West that are imperialistic, sure, because they were produced during the 19th century, right? So yeah, people say that we should cancel Tolstoy, cancel Dostoevsky, right? And of course they're Pushkin, even in Ukraine, right, has been removed from the public sphere. And that's totally understandable. Although, again, even many Ukrainians would see that as overkill. But the point is that in appreciating Russian culture in the kind of classic sense that I'm talking about, whether that's literature or music or film, it's about part of the appreciation is putting it in its historical context. And so, of course, later Pushkin, right, is a big fan of the Russian Empire in some ways, right? And does that mean because of the Ukraine war we have to cancel him in Britain? And it goes back to what you were both saying. It's like that would be like saying we shouldn't be reading Joseph Conrad, right? because he could be interpreted as racist and supporting the British Empire. And yet there's lots of literature that says, well, actually, Joseph Conrad, writing The Heart of Darkness, is much more complex. And actually, Russian literature is exactly the same. So I just wanted to...
Is it not perhaps because right now this whole Russian-Ukraine stuff, it feels more immediate, it's closer, and there's also perhaps because there's a long history of Russian culture being used to dominate neighbouring identities, not just Ukraine, and perhaps that history, whether it's imperial Russification or during the Soviet Union, it makes the cultural space feel a lot more political.
Very probably. I mean, if we just talk about Ukraine's history, say in the revolution, as an independent-ish state, I think the objective way to talk about that, it would be one of strife, chaos, famine. It was not this rosy-eyed sort of thing that it's sometimes portrayed to be. But yes, the flip side of that is, as Jonny said, there were attempts to, nullify other identities, still are. How lots of languages were lost or their alphabets Russified in other parts of Russia. I also think there's and we can tie in the academia and media thing here. Should we not have more responsibility to be objective, rather than knee-jerk, as John said, Russia, we have to... we don't do that for other countries. Should we, even just something as simple as there are nice restaurants in Moscow. James Dellingpole wrote about that recently in the Spectator. Actually, crime is it is quite safe, Russia. There are nice things about this country. Yeah, go on, Jeremy.
Well, I mean, maybe we want to segue into a more grounded discussion of Russia in a minute. But again, I mean, on the decolonial, post-colonial thing, sure, I have written a lot about how Russian studies, Slavic studies, has always been hugely Russocentric, and there are some good reasons for that, because essentially pretty much everywhere where I've had an academic job has been because historically, because of the Cold War, the university and the government that funds that university thought that people needed to know what was happening in Russia, which of course they did equate with the Soviet Union, rightly, wrongly, right? And so, yeah, it's kind of there are historical reasons for Russian being hugely dominant in universities, right? At the same time, I would also say, sure, there should be much more focus on Ukraine and other places. But again, the people that are doing these criticisms are almost always adopting a lack of a position that is not based on knowing what actually happens.
It's based in morality rather than an actual understanding and reflection.
So, and I've always said this from the beginning.
Yeah.
If you want to have Ukrainian studies separate from Russian studies, you're not living on this planet.
Yes.
Because that's not how universities operate. And if you want to defund Russian studies, fine. But that will also mean that there will not be any Ukrainian studies. So there has to be reality, and most of the people writing stuff about academia criticizing Russian studies, they're starting from a bad faith position.
And I'll let Jonny jump in, but I think it undermines their objectivity and their authority. I mean, we won't name anybody, but if your shtick is to go on Twitter, and I'm not calling it X, it's Twitter, sorry, or Blue Sky.
Well, you probably saw this new Eastern European article in August by a Ukrainian saying we should be studying Russian more in university.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Did you see that, James?
I did, yeah.
I think, so you two are academics, I'm not. I went to university, but I'm definitely not an academic. So I want to talk a little, before we sort of move this on, I'd like to talk really about the gap between the debates you guys have in academia and then the debates we see on Twitter and maybe people are having at the pub, let's say, or in ordinary life. Because scholars and activists might argue endlessly over whether staging Tchaikovsky or reading Dostoevsky is politically acceptable. But most people, the man on the street, doesn't think in those terms. If someone sees a good ballet, they'll go and enjoy it. If someone wants to read a great Russian novel, they'll just read it. They'll pick it up without worrying about geopolitics. And the average person doesn't police their bookshelf in the way that intellectuals, academics, police discourse. Because I think maybe it's because culture has this kind of inertia. It's like too embedded in the human experience to be cancelled completely. And even in fiercest wartime climates, people want to keep listening to good music, watching good films, reading great books, regardless of where they come from. So I think while you two can talk about the academic side, real life is far from academia.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a good segue into, how the Russian population, because, we live in Russia, either permanently or part-time. But yeah, the Russian population has kind of hunkered down, and they want to feel good about themselves still and not be constantly made to feel guilty focusing on the war every day. I mean, if it wasn't on the news every day, the war, you probably wouldn't know it was happening. That's, all summer long in Yekaterinburg, that's where I'm based, you wouldn't know there was a war going on. People went to, what was that guy? It was on The Voice. Was it Basta? He had a concert. Go on, Jeremy.
No. So I just think the way for me to link these two topics, right, is to say, and it's not my original thoughts here, it's something I think most people in my position agree with, that the cancel culture on the basis of national origin in some Western countries, mainly Anglo-Saxon countries, right, actually makes things much more difficult, because it allows a narrative in Russia to get more traction that everybody is against us, Russophobia is real, and it just consolidates
Plays into the
people
hands of those that want that view.
plays into the hands of the Russian media.
Yeah, Johnny?
Yeah, I think we see cancel culture here in Russia too. People who, celebrities who are no longer seen on TV. You don't hear their music anymore on the radio because of what they've said about Putin or Ukraine. And so, what in the West are we saying? We're just going to do the exact same. If you don't toe the line, then you get Kremlin-style banned from TV and banned from radio. Is that really what we're doing now?
Well, it seems so. I mean, put it this way, if one of us were to go on, let's just say, the BBC or ITV News and say, actually, our lives in Russia are very comfortable. You know, I order Perekrestok. For listeners that don't know what that is, it's like a mid-level supermarket in Russia.
It's very expensive now, by the way.
It's very expensive now, yeah, as is everything. But it takes about 30 to 40 minutes for my shopping to be at my front door. They come up the lift with it. They don't just, bang on the door and leave a box like Morrison's do. But, I mean, you'd never be invited back, would you? But that's not even a controversial thing to say that actually happens.
Well, I mean, I have obviously really strong views about this because my job, as I see it as a researcher, is to not normalize Russia, but to do research on ordinary things and ordinary people, right? And that's why we're having this conversation. So, yeah, I mean, inevitably, people then get the wrong idea that you're trying to apologize or justify, geopolitical or political things that are going on. And of course, that's not the case at all. If anything, it's the opposite, right? Unless we kind of leave our baggage at the door and actually try and understand what's happening in Russia through the eyes of ordinary people, right? Or through everyday life, as you're kind of saying, with like supermarket deliveries, feeling a sense of convenience, comfort and safety, ordinariness, right? Then we can't really do justice to the other topics.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Go on, John.
I was wanting to say, really, that we can talk about ordinary people all we want, but Western people don't care about ordinary Russian people. No, some things they might care about is Russian culture. That's something that could actually build the strongest bridges between Russia and the UK. And I think, especially when politics are broken, it might be the only option. You look during the Cold War, ballet troupes, like chess champions would travel, and film festivals where people could see Soviet movies. It was often the only form of actual connection between Soviet Union and the West. And if we start, I mean, we've already started, but if we cut off cultural exchange today, we risk making that political divide, which is now temporary, permanent.
Yeah, and Woody Allen did the same thing when he came to Moscow, didn't he? You don't win.
Yeah. I think it's been said already here, but the irony of this is that shutting down this dialogue and shutting down this culture doesn't weaken the Kremlin. If anything, it strengthens hardliners by isolating these ordinary Russians, the ones that we care about. It isolates them and convinces them that Russia is hated as a country, and the West doesn't just hate the country, it hates them as people. It's not just their government. We hate you.
Yeah, and this is the. I mean, as a British person in Russia, I don't know about your experiences, but this is almost always a topic that comes up, especially with people that perhaps a little bit less cosmopolitan and who don't interact with foreigners usually.
Which is most of the country, yeah.
Which is most. But I mean, particularly in my life, people are really, really exercised by this idea that Russophobia is gathering pace in the West.
Yeah, if
and, as I said, I'm repeating myself now, but it's hugely counterproductive.
If I just come in on that quickly, because my history of the Golden Ring that I'm currently writing, hopefully will be out next year. One point I make at the end is, these myths of, what Russia is, what it isn't, and that there is, another part of the world that refuses to accept us and wants to. That does have meaning for a lot of people still today, because it's been pushed over the centuries for so long, and it has become intertwined with the national mentality a lot.
It has resonance, right?
Has resonance, yeah. Even in Britain, we have that a little bit, because we're an island that has been invaded constantly, and this whole, they're coming after us, we have to. That is resonating in Britain. I'll let John jump in now, but we'll stick to Russia.
Yeah, it's. I mean, one of my tactics, if I speak to a Russian with this kind of view, I ask them about Putin and the government, and I find things that they don't agree with. Even the most hardliner disagrees with some things.
Sure.
Yeah. And I say to them, okay, so if I came to Russia and assumed that all Russians agreed with this, I would be wrong. Why do you assume that I, as an English person, agree with everything my government does? And that's the easiest way to make them think, oh, right, yeah, maybe governments are promoting this, but normal people, they don't hate us.
Well, no, normal people. I mean, where we live in Yekaterinburg, there was a tram stop that was 2 years delayed that cost billions of rubles. Just one tram line with one stop along it that they wanted to extend out. And people were like, yeah, what the hell's going on here? There is discontent with the way things are. And yeah, I wrote about this a couple of years ago in the election, the last presidential election, when you don't get the roads cleared in time, people care about that a bit more than they care about whatever Solovyov is saying, for instance. Most people are not really watching that.
Well, yeah, that's something that we could maybe talk about another time.
We're just...
The misunderstanding in the West that Russians are glued to their televisions and radios, lapping up the more extreme stuff.
Yeah. Go on, John, yeah.
No, I want to say... I don't think that Russians are glued to their TV. But if you've ever gone to a Russian house or a dacha, you'll sit at the table, you'll be talking about everything in the world, but what will be on in the background constantly is the telly. Yeah. Nobody's watching it, but it's there. It's like a background noise to your entire life. It's like a soundtrack. So, yeah, people are not glued to it, but it's always on. And you try and turn it off and you get dirty looks.
And that makes it really hard to talk to a Western audience about the meaning of state-controlled media for ordinary people. Because, like you say, you're absolutely right. It's the wallpaper in people's lives, right? So it does have an effect, but not necessarily the effect that some of my colleagues...
Right. I think one thing me and Jeremy would agree on here is that, because we look at the regions a lot, the local newspapers are more popular. People actually get their news more so from local sources. But just to bring it back again a bit to the theme of what we're talking about today. So I suppose we should talk about, what is it about foreigners and foreign companies that is still appealing about Russia? Yeah. We'll start with Johnny on this one as the sort of resident Muscovite.
Well, foreign companies, the answer is easy. It's money. Foreign people, I think it's fairly simple. I'm going to talk about Moscow now in particular. It's an incredibly comfortable, easy place to live. Incredibly convenient. It's like you're living in a 15-minute city wherever you live in the city. If you didn't want to leave your little micro district ever, you would never have to, and you could have a perfectly comfortable and happy life too. It's not depressing. So I think the reason why people like living here is exactly that. It's just incredibly comfortable. Although, like I've mentioned before, it is getting a lot more expensive. It's not this. I remember when I first came to Russia as a student, I was a student at UCL in London, and I was incredibly poor. I was counting every penny, and then I moved to Russia, and then I was buying rounds for the whole bar because it was so cheap. But now I have a lot more money than I did when I was a student, but I would never dream of that. It's just so much more expensive. So that is one downside. But it's in terms of quality of life and comfort, you can't beat Moscow. Nobody can convince me there's a better place to live for that.
Jeremy?
I mean, I'm still unsure about how we're kind of dealing with this topic, but obviously for a lot of people from Britain or the US, to pick up on what Johnny was saying, the attraction when they go to Russia is, this very different experience of the urban environment, being very vibrant, having all these facilities, and just the ability to kind of immediately kind of connect with the social life that's going on, and that could be true even in small cities. And there is a kind of cultural element to this as well, which is a bit of a stereotype, and I would be critical about it. But Russian people are very open to strangers, and particularly foreigners, of course, in a social environment, right? If the environment is right, people will open up and be incredibly friendly. And of course, they're kind of almost self-aware in this, that they know that the stereotype of their culture is that they should be hospitable. And so they almost are kind of overcompensating to be hospitable. So, every foreigner that's, I think, and again, regardless of where they come from, that has ever been invited to a Russian person's home will have that horror story of being almost fed to excess, right?
Yeah, every time
and watered to excess as well. So it is a bit of a stereotype, and of course, stereotypes can be partly true, of hospitality and friendliness and openness as well.
Well, there's a lot to be said for that, and I'll let John jump in a second. But I mean, we have talked before, 15-minute cities. In the UK, it's kind of a conspiracy, but Yekaterinburg, Moscow, they're 15-minute cities. Now, Moscow has 15 million people. Yekaterinburg's got 1 point whatever. But it's still... And, I was reading yesterday, excuse me, Choi Chatier's book on everyday life in Russia throughout history. And very good book if anyone listening wants to pick it up. But the regions, she kind of... they were seen as a place to do nothing. And there is, it's a good place, Russia, to do everything. Johnny says in Moscow. And nothing. You can just go, I love just doing nothing in the middle of nowhere. There's a lot to be said for that.
We should do a whole podcast about doing nothing.
Yeah, we could. Yeah,
what kinds of nothing can we do? Very enjoyable nothingness. Johnny?
Yeah, I also think that if we talk about the differences between pre-2022 and post-2022, if I spoke to the average foreigner moving to Russia pre-2022, it was exchange students, it was people coming to teach English for 1 year or a couple of years, just for like a gap year almost. It was people moving here because they they met a Russian girl in Ayia Napa or something. That was the type of thing I was experiencing. And now when I meet foreigners, so post 2022, the average Brit or American doesn't want to move here anymore. So it's a different type of person. It's more of a sort of conservative, traditionalist, anti-woke, anti-Western type of person, which is totally different. So the reason they, let's say, enjoy Russia is totally different from the way I enjoy Russia. So we can talk in our way, but there could be a podcast of 3 totally different Brits or 3 totally different Americans saying something totally different.
I never used to see those guys. We won't call them white nationalists or anything. We'll call them conservative. Like,
I think you just have.
Well, they have this, it's this, and I think very wrong image. Russia is the beacon of conservative hope. It is the beacon of the white race because their sports teams are all white. We can talk about football in a minute, actually. But I never met anybody like that, 10, 15 years ago.
I've never met anybody like that, but you're the expert. I mean, you're both a lot younger than me. So obviously I hear about it. And again, maybe you want to talk more about this, but of course there is migration on the basis of this misunderstood idea
Right.
that Russia is a conservative, traditional society, especially in gender relations, right?
Yeah, and I think it also links to what's very interesting, because this links to something we've just talked before about convenience. So you'll find a lot of these sorts of traditionalist conservative people from America in particular, they'll come and move to Russia and say, wow, Moscow is so convenient. You can get your food delivered in 10 minutes and it costs
Right,
nothing.
Roby.
Yeah, but no, but really, who is delivering it? It's migrants who
Right.
are underpaid migrants, and in their own country, the reason they moved here a lot of the time is to escape mass migration. Well, if there was no mass migration in Russia, then all this stuff you loved wouldn't exist. So
Well, yeah.
it's a very weird mentality that a lot of these people have.
I mean, even in Yekaterinburg, there's more women now wearing the hijab lately. That's probably the subject for a not sure why that is, but it is something we've noticed.
Oh, wow,
Perhaps
yeah.
it's migration from the south and the Caucasus.
I was really, I mean, I shouldn't have been because when I'm in Moscow, I often am hanging out around the bit of Moscow where there is this massive mosque. But actually, in the other on the other side of Moscow, where I live, there's a huge number of hijabis. So we should definitely talk about that. Maybe we could devote a talk
Yeah,
to
that'd be a good idea.
again more focused on this perception of this misperception of it being very white.
Same with gender relations. We could probably, I mean, there are different dynamics between the
basically
sexes.
what we're saying is that it's
yeah.
it's a really multicultural society. And again, that's one reason that I really enjoy interacting with people in Russia, because a lot of the time you're not actually interacting with ethnic Russians. You're interacting with all kinds of people.
Yeah, right. And
Yeah,
Vladimir
and
has the
and the question, where are you really from, gets asked a lot in Russia, and a lot of the time it's because people have very mixed backgrounds. And there used to be a thing on it used to be very important during the Soviet Union. On Soviet passports, it said what your race was.
Yeah, it did.
So it would say Bashkir, for example. And I know that when the Russian Federation started and they made new passports, that was taken away. And there were protests by people saying, you're taking away my identity out of my passport. I'm not just Russian, I'm Chuvash, right? So I think the multicultural side of Russia is something we definitely need to explore. And it's one of the reasons I like being here too.
Yes, you get a lot of everything. You get a lot of different themed restaurants, a lot of, well, your neighbours. I had Azerbaijani neighbours a few years ago in Kralátska and Moscow. I was going to say as well, in Vladimir, there's a large Armenian community, which, never gets written about or talked, but it's there. And there's a reason for that. Yeah. So, yeah, to bring it back to the theme, though, I guess we're kind of run. So I think we all agree it is okay to like Russia, but well, yeah, Jeremy, do you want to?
Well, I mean, I don't have anything more to say about the cult. We talked a lot about culture. We've started to talk more about the reality, which is, I think, what we wanted to focus on. We talked a little bit about multiculturalism.
I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but before we move on totally from the cultural stuff, I would like to hear your opinions on whether Ukraine's stance, Ukraine's cultural backlash against Russian culture is justified.
Can I come in with something topical?
Okay, go for it.
I feel, again, we should be trying to bring stuff in that's topical. Like I said, in August there was this intervention from Ukrainian journalist, I guess, saying we need more Russian studies. But obviously, I completely disagreed with what kind of Russian studies he wanted. But also, just this week, right, there was this story in Lviv about a journalist, wannabe politician, Ukrainian from Lviv, who organized the dismantling of a monument to one of the most important female filmmakers in the world,
Yeah.
because she was a Russian speaker. I'm not sure. I mean, there's a debate over how. Again, it was a purity test that I just think is hugely counterproductive, even within Ukraine, right? So it's Larisa Shepitko, who probably nobody has heard of, but she is respected. I mean, she won all kinds of awards in the 1970s. She is respected as probably one of the greatest female filmmakers in the 20th century, and probably the greatest female filmmaker in the Soviet Union, and one of the greatest directors anyway. And it's just, and even Ukrainians were saying, this is cultural vandalism. Why do we need to be doing this during wartime, right? Is this a good use of resources? And it just shows you, though, and it goes back to how we started this discussion, guys. The problem is not ordinary people. The problem is entrepreneurial political idiots.
But could you not argue that there is a clear logic for this? Because if some people see culture as neutral, and some people see it as part of Russian state power. So if you could say for centuries, Russian literature, art, language were woven into imperial expansion. People say Pushkin and Tolstoy weren't just writers. They become icons of a civilizing mission that was used to place Russia above its neighbors. We can talk in the Soviet Union as well about ballet, theatre, cinema deployed as soft power, presented abroad as proof of Soviet Union superiority. And I think if you see it in this way, Ukraine's push to decolonize, sort of clearing Russian books from libraries or banning Russian performers, is less about attacking culture itself, but more about stripping away symbols of domination.
Well, it's about giving their own culture more agency over the previously, even though Russian culture, I mean, again, people that don't know what they're talking, Russian culture does still dominate in a lot of the former Soviet Union, and in Ukraine in particular. You can't, I wrote this, I mentioned the volume me and Anastasia Mahon wrote, Ukraine, What Did We Miss? International Studies Perspectives. There's the shameless plug. But, you know, my bit was on the shared history between Russia. You know, you can't just detangle Ukraine as a entity, as a culture, as a bit from Russia. You just can't do it. And I think if you try to, you're just being not just disingenuous, but it's just intellectually lazy.
It's a nation-building exercise.
It is a nation-building exercise, but it's a negative one in this case.
And the European
right?
Union didn't like Estonia do it. They told Estonia and Latvia, you know, like denying these guys citizenship is just blatant discrimination.
What was really telling by this Ukrainian activist was he couldn't offer anything in place of demolishing this monument. So he had nothing positive to offer. He only had something negative to offer. This woman was a Russophone. She was suspect because she was from Donbass originally, and she made Soviet films. So she should be erased from Ukrainian history.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Good luck with that. 70 years, right?
Yeah.
So what are you going to have left? By all means, build your nation and decolonize it and promote Ukrainianness. But you're going to have very limited resources to do that if you can't incorporate things that happened in the Soviet period in some way in your nation-building project. You can't just say 70 years was occupation and colonialism.
Of course, yeah. Go on, John.
And let's say, I think that what some people might accuse you of missing is that Ukrainians simply are not interested in building any cultural ties or any ties at all with Russia right now. And it's really not hard to understand why. They feel under attack, many people displaced or worse. So when outsiders talk about, oh, let's keep dialogue open, or let's not cancel Russian culture, it can sound to them to be tone deaf. So I think for them, cutting off Russian culture isn't just a policy debate. It's sort of a emotional survival response. Yeah. I'm talking about individual Ukrainians now, not necessarily a state-driven banning of things. So you could say that while it surged after 2022, in reality, it's a longer thing, a longer lasting thing, which is about reclaiming a space that for centuries was dominated by someone else's languages and
Yeah,
someone
and it's
else's
going to take a
symbols.
while, isn't
And
it?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because
I mean,
just
you two have said that Ukrainian culture is inextricably linked to Russian, and maybe they think, well, we've got our own culture that we'd quite like to promote.
yeah, which is fair enough. I mean, just one thing our viewers might not know about, viewers, listeners, whatever. Zelensky and the cabinet all speak Russian to each other, not Ukrainian. So these things do take a while. I mean, my mother-in-law, born in Mariupol, but her mother was Greek. You know, my wife's uncle married a
City originally,
Belarusian
yeah.
woman. I mean, these are people, they're born in Ukraine, but would never consider themselves as Ukrainian. And that's part of that reclaiming that agency, isn't it, that we've all been talking about.
Rastafarian culture is part of Ukrainian culture,
Yeah.
whether we like it
and
or not.
just whether we like it or not, yeah. So to bring it back again, so we think it's okay to like Russia, but we have to be more careful, all of us, would we say?
We could do. I mean, we talked about this before, guys. I mean, we could do a whole thing about Russia in Ukraine, but maybe we don't want to. Maybe we don't want to go there. I mean, what we've said now, I think, should be interesting for listeners that maybe don't know that much, because again, this is part of the problem of the Western media. It simplifies things to such a degree that merely us saying there's a huge Russophone element in Ukrainian culture could be controversial.
John?
Yeah, I think that, well, it is controversial because not because it's not true, it's because it doesn't fit a political narrative.
Yeah.
But any Ukrainian will tell you that they learned Russian in school, and you don't get taught Russian language in school if it's not a big part of your history and culture. So no matter what they say, it is a big part of the history. Now, is it going to be a part of the future? That's up for questioning. But it's hard to split those two countries totally because of just where they are geographically and their history of being joined together under the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire, even the Kievan Rus.
Yeah. I would say as well, like, enjoy your Dostoevsky, enjoy your ballet, enjoy your music, enjoy vodka. Like, I think it's okay for you to do that.
Russian
Of
culture
course,
is a guilt-free experience.
vodka is a guilt-free experience. Exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's all about having perspective and not being a binary douchebag, basically, isn't it? You've got to...
Well,
Yeah.
I think history shows that cultural boycotts rarely stick in the long run.
Yeah. They don't
During
really
First and Second World Wars, there were campaigns in Britain and America to boycott German music. Orchestras were pressured. Don't play Beethoven, don't play Wagner, don't play Brahms because Germany's the enemy. But audiences didn't stop valuing the works for what they are. As soon as the wars ended, these composers returned to the mainstream repertoire because the music's just simply too important, too good to ignore.
And
The
it's
same
too
thing
big a
happened-
country to ignore.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think... Go on, yeah.
I think the same thing happened with Japanese and German products. People say, oh, these are actually really good quality. We're not going to buy them anymore. So that's why it's hard to imagine Russian culture disappearing from the global stage. Even if it's politically sidelined now, people will always come back to Tchaikovsky, Chekhov, Tarkovsky, because these works transcend the politics of the moment.
Yeah, just one more thing, then I'll let Jeremy have the last word. I think we would all encourage people to visit Russia as well, because you can't really... It's a country you can't appreciate and understand without... You don't get it unless you've been and spent some time there. Go on, Jeremy.
That's an interesting topic, again, that maybe deserves more treatment from us. So you're saying, James, if you are a Russia culture enjoyer, which we all are, then what supplements that is visiting the country. And I also think that's a huge misconception because of the war that Russia is closed. And of course it's not.
No.
And I have this conversation all the time with young Danish people who, because of the media, assume that there's like a blockade or that the borders are completely closed. And of course I have to be careful that, I'm not allowed to say to my students, you should go to Russia. But obviously many of them want to. And so what I can say is, well, if somebody wanted to go to Russia, it's actually relatively straightforward in doing that.
Yes, it is.
Of course, there are some things that they should know. And it's like any form of tourism, you need to know, you need to be prepared for things to be different.
Yeah, just don't be
In
stupid.
many ways, it's even easier than before because the visa queues are non-existent.
Well, I mean, that's the first thing. Many people believe that you can't get a Russian visa, which again is in some ways a projection of their own state's policies that make it almost impossible for Russian citizens to get
And
visas.
far
It's not
easier
actually
to
true.
get the residency in Russia as well, actually. Like, it's a much simpler process than it is for most European countries. But yeah, sure. I think we should end it there. We've covered quite a lot of ground. Or
Are we going to? Should we talk about any news stories?
any news stories? Oh,
What's in the news? We'll finish with what's in the news. Johnny, what's in your news? What's in the news from where you are?
Well, from where I am, that's an interesting question. But what's really on the news? I was watching the news this morning. It's all about Valdai and Putin, and him talking about what did he called NATO a paper tiger. So I think what's interesting as well is, this is a great point linked to what I've been saying before, is it's on the news, Putin speaking at Valdai. Go and ask a Russian person you know. What did Putin say yesterday at Valdai? They haven't got a clue. The only people who watch it are Western journalists and academics.
That's true.
yeah.
Johnny?
No, in
James?
Yekaterinburg, there's been a couple of fires because, it's the Urals, forest fires. But also, some kids were sent home because there was actually a problem with the water supply. And we're not quite sure what was going on. Maybe it was dirty or it just wasn't coming on there. I mean, it was again, local news reported this. So I guess everyone was very happy to be sent home. Actually, I certainly would have been if that were me,
Yeah.
And my favourite story this week was just a social media post that I saw, not on Twitter. Somebody complaining about migrants in Moscow living 20 to an apartment and putting magnets on their water meter,
Right.
which was funny on one level, but also made me reflect on how in Kaluga region, where I live, a lot of people are constantly discussing the high energy prices, high utility prices, and how to cheat or beat the system. And of course, I'm sure in most countries there have historically been people trying to, put magnets on meters or wind them backwards. So that was quite a funny little story. And so I was sharing on my social media how when I had the plumbing installed in Russia in country cottage, my plumber was like, this is how you wind your water meter backwards using a vacuum cleaner. That was that's not really news, but it's kind of something that I would like to end on.
All right. And on that happy note, we'll end it there. Thank you for listening, and tune in next time for more Unfiltered Russia.